Trust, he believed, was not something you questioned every day. It was supposed to sit quietly in the background of marriage, like the hum of a refrigerator you only notice when it stopped working. For years, his trust had been exactly that, unnoticed, untested, assumed. He woke before dawn most mornings, careful not to disturb her. The house was always silent at that hour, wrapped in a gray stillness that made everything feel honest. He would stand in the kitchen, coffee mug warming his palms, and look down the hallway toward their bedroom. Some days the door was slightly open, some days closed. He never thought much of it. Why would he? Their marriage hadn't been perfect, but had been real, or at least he thought so. They shared routines, bills, family dinners, and the quiet agreements that form when two people have been together long enough to stop explaining themselves. Love, to him, was consistency. Showing up. Staying. She had changed, though. Not suddenly, not in a way that screamed alarm. It was subtle, a shift in tone. Longer pauses before answering simple questions. A phone that never left her side. He noticed these things the way one notices with a changing, vaguely uneasily, but without panic. At night, when they lay in bed side by side, her body angled just slightly away from his, he told himself it was stress. Everyone carried stress. She said she was tired. He believed her. Belief was easier than doubt. Sometimes he would catch her staring into nothing, her face tight with thoughts she didn't share. When he asked what was wrong, she smiled too quickly and said, "Nothing, just a long day." The smile always ended the conversation. He didn't push. He had never been the kind of man who pushed. There were moments, small, fleeting ones, when something cold brushed the back of his mind. A missed call she didn't explain. A laugh he heard over the phone that didn't sound like it belonged to him. Once, he woke in the middle of the night and found her sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through her phone in the dark. She startled when she noticed him awake. "Couldn't sleep," she said. He nodded and turned over. Trust, after all, was built on not interrogating the people you loved. He told himself that real betrayals were loud. They came with shouting, slammed doors, obvious lies. What he didn't understand yet was that the most devastating ones were quiet. They slipped in gently, wearing familiar faces. On the surface, their life looked stable. Neighbors waved. Friends envied their calm. No one would have guessed there was a growing distance between them, one he felt but could not measure. He blamed himself for feeling it. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe this was just what marriage looked like after enough years passed. That night, as he locked the front door and turned off the lights, he glanced at her phone charging on the counter. The screen lit briefly with a notification before going dark again. He didn't read it. He didn't touch it. He walked past it without slowing down, because in that moment, he still believed trust was stronger than curiosity, and he had no idea that the next knock on their door would begin unraveling everything he thought he knew about her, about himself, and about how fragile trust truly was. The knock came the next afternoon, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the quiet of the house. It wasn't the kind of knock that carried urgency or panic. It was controlled, professional, the kind that announced authority before a word was spoken. He was the one who answered. A man stood on the porch in a neatly pressed uniform, posture straight, expression neutral. Sunlight caught the badge on his chest, making it glint for a brief moment. The officer introduced himself calmly, his voice practiced, almost reassuring. He explained there had been a minor incident in the area, routine questions, nothing serious. Before the husband could respond, his wife appeared behind him. He felt it immediately, the shift in the air. Her shoulders stiffened. Her breath caught just enough for him to notice. The officer's eyes flickered toward her, and for a fraction of a second, something unspoken passed between them. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by polite nods and controlled smiles. But the moment lingered in his chest like a dull ache. She spoke first. Her voice was softer than usual, careful. Too careful. The officer addressed most of his words to her after that, explaining details she seemed to already understand. The husband stood there, half present, listening to sentences that felt oddly rehearsed. When he asked a question, the officer answered politely but briefly, redirecting his attention back to her. It didn't make sense, and yet nothing was openly wrong. When the officer finally left, thanking them for their time, the house felt smaller. The door clicked shut, sealing in a silence that pressed down on them both. "What was that about?" the husband asked, keeping his tone light. "Just some neighborhood thing," she said, already turning away. He needed to verify something. Her explanation ended there. She busied herself in the kitchen, moving too fast, knocking a spoon onto the counter. He watched her without speaking. He wasn't suspicious. Not yet, but something had been planted. A thought he didn't invite. Later, as the days stretched on, he replayed the scene in his mind. The way she hadn't looked at him while answering. The way the officer had known her name without asking. None of it was proof. Proof belonged to people who were already convinced something was wrong. He was not one of them. That evening, she received a phone call and stepped outside to take it. Through the window, he saw her pace in the driveway, one hand pressed to her forehead. She spoke in low, urgent tones. When she came back inside, she avoided his eyes. "Who was that?" he asked. "Just a friend," she replied. He didn't ask which one. As night fell, he noticed her checking the locks twice, then again before bed. She kept her phone face down on the nightstand. When it vibrated, she flinched and turned it off completely. In the darkness, he lay awake beside her, listening to her breathing. It was uneven, shallow. Anxiety, maybe. Guilt, his mind whispered, then corrected itself. That was unfair. Unproven. Still, the image of the officer's uniform stayed with him. Authority carried weight. It changed dynamics. It made questions dangerous. He wondered, not accusing, not yet, why a simple visit had left her so unsettled. By morning, the routine would return. Coffee, work, normal conversations. But beneath it all, something had shifted. The house remembered the knock, even if they pretended not to. And as he dressed for the day, a quiet realization settled in. Some doors, once opened, never fully close again. He didn't know it yet, but the patterns were already forming, and soon they would become impossible to ignore. The house tried to return to normal, but normal no longer fit the way it used to. After the visit, days passed without explanation, yet everything felt slightly misaligned, like furniture moved an inch to the left. Conversations resumed, meals were cooked, routines followed, but the ease was gone. In its place was something quieter and heavier. Awareness. He didn't start watching her on purpose. It happened gradually, without intention, the way a person begins listening for a sound they once ignored. He noticed the timing of her exits, how errands stretched longer than necessary. He noticed how often she checked her phone, how quickly she locked it when he entered the room. At first, he argued with himself. Everyone deserves privacy. Everyone has moods. You're reading too much into this. But patterns have a way of repeating themselves until they can no longer be dismissed. She started leaving the room to answer calls, always stepping outside, always lowering her voice. When he asked where she was going, she smiled and said, "Just need some air." He watched her through the window again, pacing, shoulders tense, laughter appearing at moments that didn't match the words she used inside the house. The laughter bothered him most. It wasn't the kind she shared with him anymore. One evening, he mentioned the officer casually, pretending curiosity rather than concern. "Funny how he already knew you," he said, keeping his eyes on the television. Her reaction was instant. Too instant. "He didn't," she snapped, then softened her tone quickly. "I mean, he probably got my name from somewhere. You're overthinking it." Overthinking. The word landed harder than she intended. That night, she slept facing the wall. He began noticing absences, emotional ones before physical ones. She was there, but not present. When he spoke, her responses lagged, as if she were answering someone else in her head first. When he touched her arm, she stiffened, then relaxed as if reminding herself to respond normally. Guilt, again, whispered in his thoughts. Not as an accusation, but as a question. He hated that question. There were other things, too. Receipts that didn't match stories. A new passcode on her phone. A tension that entered the room whenever a police car passed the house. Lights off, but presence undeniable. She would fall silent until the sound faded. He told himself coincidence stacked on coincidence could still be coincidence. But the truth was simpler and more unsettling. His instincts had begun speaking louder than his loyalty. One afternoon, while folding laundry, he found a uniform blue thread caught on the inside of her jacket pocket. It wasn't enough to mean anything. It was also enough to mean everything. He held it between his fingers longer than necessary before letting it fall. That evening, she accused him of being distant. "You're not listening anymore," she said. "You're always somewhere else." He wanted to laugh at the irony. Instead, he apologized. Later, alone in the living room, he sat with the lights off, the glow of the street lamp cutting shadows across the walls. He replayed every moment since the knock at the door. Each interaction felt like a piece of a puzzle he hadn't wanted to solve. Patterns didn't announce themselves dramatically. They whispered. They repeated. They waited for acknowledgement. He realized then that denial had been a form of protection, not for her, but for himself. Seeing the truth would mean admitting that the life he trusted was built on something unstable. Still, knowing a storm was coming didn't mean he knew where lightning would strike. That night, as she slept, her phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. Once, then again, he stared at it, heart pounding, every instinct screaming at him to look away. He didn't touch it. Not yet, but for the first time, he understood something clearly. Whatever was happening wasn't random, and soon the patterns would lead him somewhere he could no longer turn back from. The phone buzzed again. This time, he didn't tell himself it was nothing. The room was dark, except for the faint glow of the alarm clock. Her breathing was slow and even, the kind that came with deep sleep, or exhaustion pretending to be peace. The phone vibrated once more on the nightstand, soft but insistent, like it knew it was being ignored. He sat up. For a moment, he hovered there, caught between two versions of himself, the man who trusted too much, and the man who could no longer afford to. His hand moved before his thoughts could stop it. The screen lit up. A name wasn't saved, just a number. Beneath it, a message preview glowed faintly in the dark. "Did he believe you?" His chest tightened, breath shallow and sharp. He didn't open the message at first. He stared at those 4 words, reading them again and again, hoping they would rearrange themselves into something harmless. They didn't. His fingers trembled as he unlocked the phone. The passcode came to him easily, too easily. A date he knew by heart, one she hadn't bothered to change. The message thread opened like a wound. There were dozens of texts, some careful, some reckless, some that made his stomach turn before his mind could fully process them. References to meetings, to risk, to being careful. A joke about the uniform. A complaint about him, about how he was always around. He scrolled slowly, methodically, as if speed might make it hurt more. Then he saw it. A photo. It wasn't explicit, but it didn't need to be. The angle, the familiarity, the unmistakable outline of a uniform sleeve in the frame. Her reflection caught in glass, smiling in a way she hadn't smiled at him in months. The room felt suddenly too small to hold what he was feeling. He set the phone down carefully, as if it might explode. For a long time, he just sat there, staring into the darkness, listening to his own pulse thudding in his ears. There was no confusion now, no room for interpretation. The patterns had led exactly where they were always pointing. The betrayal wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise. He went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face, gripping the edge of the sink as the reflection stared back at him. His eyes looked unfamiliar, wider, darker, older. This was the moment, he realized, where something inside him broke cleanly in two. When he returned to the bedroom, she stirred. "What's wrong?" she mumbled, half asleep. He didn't answer. Morning came too fast. At breakfast, the air between them was heavy with things unsaid. She talked about errands, about work, about nothing that mattered. He watched her mouth move and wonder how long she had been lying to him this easily. How long he had been helping her do it by choosing not to see. When she reached for his hand, he pulled away. That made her look at him. Really look. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tight. He stood up, suddenly unable to sit still. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. His hands shook, not with rage, but with something colder, clarity. "I know," he said. The word landed between them like a dropped glass. Her face drained of color. "Know what?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't insult me now." Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. She opened her mouth, closed it again. For the first time since the knock at the door, she had nothing prepared. He saw it then, not remorse, not love, but calculation, the rapid assessment of damage, of risk, that hurt more than the messages ever could. "I saw your phone," he continued. "I saw everything." Her shoulders slumped, just slightly, not in relief, in defeat. "I can explain," she whispered. He laughed once, a sound that surprised even him. "No," he said, "you can't." He walked past her, toward the front door, needing air, space, distance from the lie that had been living in his house. As his hand closed around the doorknob, he paused. "You should start thinking about who knows," he added, not turning around. "Because I'm not carrying this for you anymore." He stepped outside, the door closing behind it with a final, echoing click. Inside the house, the truth sat exposed at last. And soon it wouldn't stay between just the two of them. He didn't plan how it would happen. Exposure, he would later realize, was not a single act of revenge or courage. It was the inevitable result of carrying truth too long in silence. Once released, it chose its own path. He didn't go far after leaving the house. Just down the block, where the noise of traffic and strangers reminded him the world was still moving, indifferent to what had collapsed inside him. He stood there longer than he intended, replaying her face when he said he knew. Not the tears he had expected, not even anger, just fear. That was when he understood something fundamental had shifted. By the time he returned home, she was waiting, sitting stiffly at the kitchen table, hands folded together, eyes red but dry. The phone lay between them, face down, like a weapon placed carefully out of reach. "We need to talk," she said. "We already did," he replied. She flinched. "Please, just listen." He sat, but only because standing felt like he might shatter. She spoke quickly, too quickly, words tripping over one another. She framed it as confusion, as loneliness, as a mistake that had gone further than she intended. She never used the word affair, never said the officer's name. When she finally paused, waiting for forgiveness, he asked a single question. "Who else knows?" Her eyes dropped to the table. That was answer enough. He stood again. "I won't protect this," he said. "I won't lie for you." Her head snapped up. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand exactly what I'm doing," he said. "I'm stopping." That afternoon, he made calls he never imagined he would make. To a mutual friend who had noticed her absences. To a family member who deserved to hear the truth before rumors twisted it. Each conversation stripped another layer of secrecy away. With every word spoken aloud, the weight on his chest shifted, not lighter, but clearer. By evening, the story had grown legs. She accused him of trying to ruin her life. "You're humiliating me," she hissed, pacing the living room. "People don't need to know our private business." "Are?" he asked quietly. That word ended the argument. Later that night, a patrol car rolled slowly past the house. No lights, no siren, just presence. She froze at the window, breath shallow, eyes wide. "That's him," she whispered. The officer didn't knock. He didn't need to. His influence was already there, pressing, silent, watching. The power imbalance became impossible to ignore. This was no longer just betrayal between spouses. This was authority entangled with secrecy. The next morning, she didn't go to work. Instead, she locked herself in the bedroom, making frantic phone calls. He heard her cry for the first time, not softly, but desperately. When she emerged hours later, her composure was gone. Mascara streaked her face. Her hands shook openly now. "They're asking questions," she said. "People are talking." "Yes," he replied. "That's what happens." She looked at him like he was a stranger. Maybe he was. Word spread faster than truth ever does. Half stories, speculation, judgment. Some people avoided him. Others looked at him with pity. No one asked how it felt to be right when you never wanted to be. That evening, she packed a small bag. "I just need space," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Until this calms down." He didn't stop her. As she walked toward the door, she hesitated. "You didn't have to do this," she said. He answered without hesitation. "Yes," he said, "I did." The door closed behind her, and for the first time since the exposure, the house was truly silent. But the silence wasn't relief. It was charged, dangerous, because exposure doesn't end things. It destabilizes them. It forces people into corners. It makes secrets desperate. And as the night deepened and her calls went unanswered, a new fear crept in, one colder than betrayal. He began to wonder not what he had revealed, but what the truth might now cost her. After she left, the house didn't feel empty. It felt alert, like it was waiting for something to go wrong. At first, her silence seemed intentional, a punishment, a tactic. Hours passed without a text, without a call. He told himself she needed space, that the exposure had shaken her, and this was her way of regaining control. Still, he checked his phone more often than he cared to admit. By the second day, concern replaced anger. She hadn't returned for clothes, hadn't answered messages. When he called, it rang until voicemail, her recorded voice calm and detached, as if nothing in their lives was unraveling. He left a short message, neutral, controlled. He didn't want panic to be the first thing she heard. That night, he slept poorly, waking to every sound. The house creaked in unfamiliar ways. Each vibration of his phone made his chest tighten, then fall when it wasn't her. On the third day, whispers began. A friend asked if she was doing okay. Another mentioned seeing her car parked somewhere unusual, then corrected themselves, unsure. Information came fragmented, unreliable. She existed in pieces now, scattered across other people's observations. What unsettled him most was the absence of noise. No arguments, no accusations, no demands, just silence. He drove past places she might be, cafes she liked, the gym she used to visit, streets she took to clear her head. Her car wasn't there. Her presence felt erased rather than hidden. That afternoon, an unfamiliar number called him. He answered immediately. It was her. Her voice sounded thin, stretched tight. "I can't talk long," she said. "Where are you?" he asked. A pause. Too long. "I'm fine," she replied quickly. "I just need time." "With who?" he pressed. Another pause. Then, "Please don't do this." Her breathing was uneven now. He imagined her somewhere unfamiliar, surrounded by pressure she wouldn't name. "You can come home," he said. "We can figure this out." "No," she whispered. "You don't understand." Before he could respond, the line went dead. He tried calling back, straight to voicemail. That was the moment fear took shape. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't arrive with certainty. It came as a quiet calculation. What if silence isn't distance? What if it's containment? That evening, a patrol car idled across the street longer than necessary. He stood at the window, watching it through the blinds. No lights, no interaction, just presence. When it finally pulled away, his hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles ached. He thought of the officer, of authority that didn't need to explain itself, of power that thrived in shadows. When night fell, he found her spare keys still on the hook by the door. She hadn't planned to leave long. The realization settled heavy in his chest. He called hospitals. Nothing. He called her workplace. She hadn't shown up. When he asked if anyone had heard from her, the answer came carefully, cautiously, as if truth itself had become dangerous. Later, alone in the living room, he replayed their last conversation over and over. Her hesitation, her tone, the way she said please, not as a request, but as a warning. He opened his laptop and began documenting everything. Dates, times, calls, messages, names. He didn't know why yet. Only that instinct told him to leave a trail, in case hers vanished completely. Near midnight, his phone buzzed once. A message. No name, just a number. Stop asking questions. His blood ran cold. He typed a response, then deleted it, sat there staring at the screen, understanding at last that silence wasn't absence. It was pressure, and pressure, when it builds long enough, always leads collapse. He looked around the house, imagining her footsteps, her voice, her presence fading into something fragile and unreachable. Somewhere between exposure and disappearance, she had crossed a line he couldn't follow, and as the night deepened, one thought refused to leave him. If silence had become this dangerous, what would happen when it finally broke? The message stayed on his screen long after the phone went dark. Stop asking questions. It wasn't the threat itself that frightened him most. It was the confidence behind it. Whoever sent it believed silence could still be enforced. That whatever had begun was already far enough along that intimidation might work. He didn't sleep. Just before dawn, he checked his phone again. No missed calls. No new messages. The absence felt deliberate, like a door quietly closing. By morning, worry had sharpened into urgency. He stopped waiting for her to come back on her own. He began calling everyone, friends, co-workers, distant relatives, anyone who might have seen her in the last 24 hours. Answers came slowly, cautiously, as if people were afraid of saying the wrong thing. Then, finally, something concrete. A woman from the gym said she'd seen her the night before. Late, around 9. She looked upset, distracted, barely acknowledged anyone. Left early, alone. That was something. A place, a time. He drove there immediately, the sky already dimming as clouds rolled in. The parking lot was nearly empty now, just a few cars scattered beneath flickering lights. He sat in his car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Tried to imagine her here, what she had been thinking, who she might have been texting, whether she knew it would be the last place anyone remembered seeing her. Inside, the staff recognized her photo on his phone. One of them hesitated before nodding. "Yes," the woman said slowly. "She was here." "Was she with anyone?" he asked. "No," she replied. But she kept checking her phone, like she was waiting for someone. Waiting. That word followed him back into the night. He drove next to a small grocery store she sometimes stopped at after the gym. The cashier remembered her too. Said she bought a bottle of water and nothing else. No small talk, no smile, just a quick glance over her shoulder before leaving. Another piece. Her car was still missing. By the time he returned home, it was fully dark. The house greeted him with its familiar quiet, but now it felt hollow, like it had already accepted her absence. He stood in the doorway longer than usual, listening for sound that wouldn't come. Then he noticed something. The spare bedroom light was on. His heart jumped as he stepped inside. The room looked disturbed. Nothing violent, nothing obvious, just incomplete. A drawer pulled open. Clothes laid out on the bed, as if someone had been choosing what to take and changed their mind halfway through. On the desk sat her phone charger, still plugged in. She wouldn't have left without it. He checked the rest of the house, moving faster now. Her toiletries were still in the bathroom. Shoes by the door. Passport untouched in the drawer. Whatever she had planned, it hadn't been a clean exit. On the kitchen counter, he found a folded piece of paper. His name was written on it. The note was short. The handwriting rushed. "I just need one night to think. Please don't follow me." One night. The words tightened his chest. She had expected to come back. He sat down heavily at the table, the note trembling in his hands. His phone buzzed again, and for a split second, hope surged. It wasn't her. It was a voicemail notification from an unknown number. The timestamp was from earlier that evening. He pressed play. There was background noise at first. Wind. Footsteps. Then her voice, strained and quiet. "I'm trying to fix this," she said. "I just need you to trust me one more time." The message cut off abruptly. No goodbye. No explanation. He listened to it again. And again. That voicemail would later become the last confirmed sound of her voice. As midnight passed, he reported her missing. The officer on the phone asked standard questions, his tone calm, procedural, adult. Voluntary absence was mentioned. The words felt dismissive, premature. She wouldn't just disappear, he said. Not like this. We'll note that, the officer replied. Note it. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping against the windows in a steady rhythm. He stood at the front door, staring into the dark street, half expecting her headlights to appear, her figure to emerge, angry, embarrassed, alive. Nothing came. Somewhere between the unanswered calls and the unbroken rain, he understood something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't space anymore. It wasn't silence. It was a vanishing. And by morning, the question would no longer be where she went, but whether anyone intended to look for her at all. By morning, the word missing had already begun to soften. The officer assigned to the report spoke carefully, choosing language that left room for assumptions. Adults leave all the time. Stress makes people act unpredictably. Sometimes space turns into distance. Each sentence seemed designed to lower urgency, to shrink the space where alarm should have lived. She didn't run, he said, more than once. The response was always the same. Polite nods, neutral expressions, notes taken without eye contact. He watched the process from the outside, stunned by how quickly a person could be reduced to a file. Her name became a case number. Her absence became a possibility, not a problem. When he asked about checking traffic cameras near the gym or the grocery store, the officer hesitated. We'll get there, he said. Let's not jump to conclusions. But conclusions were already forming, just not the ones based on truth. By afternoon, rumors were louder than facts. Someone suggested she'd left to avoid embarrassment. Another implied she was protecting someone. Each version removed her further from danger and closer to blame. He realized in how easily a narrative could be shaped when one voice was missing. He drove to the station himself. Inside, the atmosphere was calm, procedural. He noticed how often conversations stopped when he approached, how eyes shifted away when he mentioned the officer she'd been involved with. No one said his name, but his presence hovered like an unspoken rule. She was involved with one of your own, he said finally, forcing the words into the open. The room went still. That's an allegation, someone replied. And it doesn't change the fact that she left voluntarily. Then show me where, he said. Show me her card use. Her phone pings. Her car. Silence answered him again. Outside the station, he sat in his car and tried to breathe. Anger threatened to overwhelm him. Not explosive, but corrosive. This wasn't incompetence. It was reluctance. The kind that came when the truth complicated things. At home, he began laying everything out on the table, literally. Notes, times, printed messages, the voicemail, the folded paper she left behind. When placed together, they told a story no official report seemed willing to see. She had planned to come back. She had been afraid. She had been pressured. None of that pointed to running. He called a reporter he barely knew, someone who had once covered a local corruption case. He didn't accuse. He didn't speculate. He just told the timeline. Let the facts speak in the order they occurred. By evening, the house phone rang for the first time since she vanished. This is getting complicated. A voice said on the other end, "You should be careful." Careful of what? He asked. The line went dead. He stood there holding the receiver, understanding now that searching for her meant stepping into something bigger than a missing person case. It meant pushing against systems that preferred quiet endings. That night, he watched the news. Her disappearance earned a brief mention. No photo, no urgency. Just a line about a woman last seen alone, possibly leaving town due to personal issues. It was a lie shaped like a fact. He turned off the television. If she wasn't being looked for, she would be lost by default. He opened his laptop again, adding to the timeline, backing it up in multiple places. If something happened to him, the story would still exist. He didn't know when that fear had become practical instead of paranoid, but it had. As he prepared to sleep on the couch, unable to face their bedroom, one truth settled heavily in his mind. She didn't disappear because she wanted to. She disappeared because someone else needed her to, and if the system refused to chase that truth, he would have to force it into the light himself. Telling the truth did not bring help. It brought consequences. Within days of speaking to the reporter, he felt the shift. Friends stopped calling. Neighbors who once waved now looked away. their faces tight with discomfort. Truth, he learned quickly, made people uneasy, not because it was unclear, but because it was inconvenient. The article didn't accuse anyone directly. It didn't need to. It laid out the timeline exactly as he'd given it. The affair, the exposure, the silence, the disappearance, the unanswered questions. It ended with a single line that refused to soften itself. Her last known contact involved a law enforcement officer. That was enough. The next morning, his phone filled with messages. Some supportive, many cautious, a few openly hostile. You're ruining lives. Why can't you let this go? You don't know what really happened. He read them all, even the ones that made his hands shake, especially those. Because buried beneath the accusations was a clear message. People were choosing comfort over truth. At the station, the tone toward him changed completely. Where there had once been polite dismissal, there was now irritation. You're complicating an open situation, an officer told him. I'm clarifying it, he replied. They didn't like that answer. He was warned, indirectly, professionally, to be careful about what he said publicly, that speculation could interfere with procedures, that emotions could cloud judgment. Each warning framed him as unstable rather than concerned. A grieving husband was understandable. A persistent one was a problem. That was the cost. The story began to shift around him. Online comments questioned his motives. Some suggested he was deflecting blame. Others implied the exposure had pushed her to leave, that he was a catalyst. He recognized the strategy immediately. If the truth couldn't be disproven, it could be discredited by isolating the person telling it. At night, alone in the house, doubt tried to creep in. He replayed his choices over and over, searching for the moment he could have acted differently. Should he have stayed quiet, protected her secret longer, trusted the system to do the right thing without pressure? But then he would listen to the voicemail again. Her voice, thin, afraid, and the doubt would burn away. One evening, he sat at the kitchen table where they had once eaten together, staring at the note she'd left behind. One night, that was all she'd asked for. That was all she'd been given. He thought about how often people were told to stay silent for their own good, how truth was treated like a disturbance rather than a necessity, how power thrived not because it was always evil, but because it was rarely challenged. That realization settled into him quietly, like a lesson learned too late, but too clearly to ignore. Silence does not keep people safe. It keeps systems comfortable. And comfort had a higher priority than justice. The reporter called again, asking follow-up questions. He answered them all. He knew what was costing him now. Reputation, peace, safety. But stopping would cost something worse. It would mean accepting a version of events that erased her twice. Once in the world, and once in the truth. Late that night, an envelope appeared in his mailbox. No return address. Inside were copies of documents, partial reports, incomplete logs, timestamps that didn't align. Nothing definitive, but enough to confirm what he already suspected. Someone had been cleaning up. He spread the papers across the table, heart pounding, not with fear this time, but with grim resolve. The truth had a price, yes. He was paying it already. But whatever came next, whatever resistance, whatever retaliation, it was clear now that the truth was more dangerous than silence ever had been. And if people were working this hard to hide something, then the next chapter of this story would not be about loss. It would be about what justice refused to see. The documents stayed spread across the table long after dawn broke. He studied them in silence, tracing dates with his finger, circling gaps that felt intentional rather than accidental. Times were rounded. Names were missing. A patrol log referenced a vehicle, without listing who had been driving it. Individually, each omission could be dismissed. Together, they formed a shape he couldn't ignore. Justice, he realized, wasn't blind. It was selective. He brought the papers to the station that morning, expecting resistance, but not the kind that met him. The officer at the desk barely glanced at them before sliding them back. These don't prove misconduct, he said evenly. They prove inconsistency, the husband replied. And inconsistency demands answers. The officer leaned back slightly, his tone shifting. You're reading meaning into administrative noise. Noise. That was the word they used when patterns became inconvenient. When he asked about the officer she'd been involved with, asked directly this time, the room cooled. He was told the matter had been reviewed internally, that no wrongdoing had been found, that the officer had an alibi for the night she vanished. What alibi? He asked. That information isn't public, came the reply. Justice, it seemed, had rules about transparency. They just didn't apply evenly. Outside, he sat in his car, the engine off, hands resting uselessly in his lap. The realization landed slowly but firmly. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed, to protect itself first. Over the next few days, more pieces surfaced. A neighbor mentioned hearing a car idle late the night she disappeared. A security camera from a closed business had gone offline during a crucial hour. A call log showed her phone pinging near an area she had no reason to be. Each lead stalled the moment it brushed against authority. He followed what he could on his own, drove the route between the gym and the grocery store, stood beneath the same streetlights, listened to the quiet hum of the place where her phone had last registered a signal. It was painfully ordinary. That was the most disturbing part. Disappearances, he learned, didn't require dramatic locations. They required opportunity and permission. The reporter published a follow-up. This time, the tone was sharper. Questions were asked without softening language. Still, official responses remained calm, measured, empty. No new searches were announced. No suspects named. The case drifted, suspended in procedural limbo. At night, he dreamed of her trying to speak, her mouth moving without sound. He woke each time with the same thought pounding in his head. They don't need her to be found. They just need this to end. One afternoon, he received a call from a block number. A man's voice low and controlled. "You're chasing the wrong outcome," the voice said. "Closure isn't always possible." "What happened to her?" he demanded. A pause. Then, "Let this go. For your own good." The line disconnected. That was the moment any remaining hope in the system finally died. Justice hadn't failed her by accident. It had looked directly at the truth and turned away because seeing it would mean consequences. For careers, for reputations, for power. He returned home and stood in the doorway of their bedroom for the first time since she vanished. The room smelled faintly of dust and memory. He sat on the edge of the bed, holding the voicemail device in his hand, listening again to the last sound of her voice. "I'm trying to fix this," she had said. She never got the chance. As the weeks turned into months, the case cooled officially, even as it burned hotter inside him. He understood now that justice wasn't something you waited for. It was something you demanded or lived without. And as he stared at the empty space beside him, one truth settled in with unbearable clarity. The world would move on without answers, but he never would, because when justice refuses to see, it doesn't erase the truth. It leaves it behind, with the people who are forced to carry it forever. Years pass, but time did not do what everyone promised it would. It didn't soften the memory. It didn't blur the edges. It didn't bring acceptance. It only made the absence permanent. The house changed slowly, the way places do when they stop being lived in and start being endured. Dust settled where her things once were. The spare bedroom remained untouched, frozen in that unfinished moment. Clothes still folded the way she had left them, as if returning was always part of the plan. He couldn't bring himself to clear it out. Removing it would mean admitting the ending was final. Officially, her case was cold. No new leads. No active investigation. Just a record stored away, referenced only when someone needed to say it had been handled. The officer's name was never publicly tied to it again. He transferred departments. Moved on. Built a life uninterrupted. That fact stayed with him more than anything else. He moved too, but not forward, just away. Away from the neighborhood, the looks, the question that had turned into polite silence. He took a smaller place in another part town, one without memories attached to the walls. It didn't help. Memories, he learned, traveled light. Sometimes people still asked about her, usually in hushed tones. Sometimes with curiosity disguised as sympathy. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" They'd ask. He stopped answering after a while. because the truth was harder than hope. He replayed everything endlessly, not to torture himself, but because his mind refused to let go of unfinished stories. The knock at the door, the glance between her and the officer, the message that said stop asking questions, the voicemail that ended too soon. There were nights he convinced himself she was still alive somewhere, trapped in a version of events that never allowed her to return. Other nights, the weight of reality pressed down harder, and he understood that some disappearances weren't meant to be solved, only survived. He kept her story alive in small, stubborn ways. He spoke her name when others avoided it. He corrected rumors. He refused to let her be reduced to a headline or worse, a cautionary tale about choices rather than power. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't innocent. But she was human, and she didn't deserve to vanish into silence. That was the wound that never healed. Not just losing her, but losing the truth with her. He learned something brutal along the way. Justice is not guaranteed. It is negotiated, filtered, protected by those who benefit from its limits. The system didn't break. It closed ranks. And still, he had no regrets. Exposure had cost him everything that came after. But silence would have cost him himself. On anniversaries of her disappearance, he walked the same route she had taken that last night. Past the gym, past the grocery store, beneath the streetlights where a phone last spoke to the world. He stood there quietly, hands in his pockets, imagining her standing beside him, telling him she was just trying to fix things. He whispered back into the empty air that she didn't have to anymore, that he carried it now. He aged faster than he should have. People said grief did that. He didn't correct them. Grief was easier to understand than what he actually lived with. The knowledge that truth could exist without consequence, that power could erase accountability, simply by waiting long enough. Sometimes, in quieter moments, he wondered if telling the truth had changed anything at all. Then he remembered the alternative, remembered what it would have meant to stay silent, to let her disappear without resistance, to let the lies settle unchallenged. And he knew the woman vanished. The man never healed. But somewhere between exposure and loss, something else survived. The truth didn't save her. It didn't bring justice. It didn't give him peace. But it remained, unburied, unfinished, unforgotten. And as long as someone remembered her, not as a rumor, not as a file, but as a person, the story was not over. It was only waiting.